Oh, hi. I'm Owlbear. Welcome to the cave. Earlier this week, I did a video celebrating 300 subscribbles and introducing you to my favorite homebrew campaign setting, a Scandinavian folklore-inspired world with a never-ending winter curse kind of problem called Felvrold. As promised, today I'm going to give you a dungeon you can run in it, and you can also run off with it and plop it down into your own world if you'd like. It's a very versatile little adventure. It can be a one-shot or the chapter of a longer campaign. You could just yoink the basic dungeon structure and flavor it however you want. I've personally run it many, many times, both as a one-shot and also as an important story beat in the long campaign I run in Felvrold. I'll describe it here as a one-shot, and as always, take what you like. Leave the rest, fill in the blanks, make it your own. You're a great DM, you know that? I trust you. Here's the pitch for your players. Your party has been adventuring in a wild, cold northern wilderness when you're suddenly caught off guard by a whiteout blizzard. Clinging together, it's too cold and the snow is falling too fast for you to just hunker down. You thought you knew what cold was, that you'd been born into it. But this is something different, something unnatural. You can hear large trees crashing to the ground around you, but you can't see them. You can't even see your companions right in front of you. Then, like a miracle, suddenly the maw of a large cave looms before you. You quickly rush inside, shaking snow off yourselves. Man, there must be some kind of hot spring down inside the cave. You think you hear the sound of water a little further in, and the air is warm, blessedly, deliciously, disarmingly warm. Hoping this will be a safe place to lay low until the storm lifts, your party cautiously makes its way further into the cave. You get a brief impression of the cave opening up into what looks like a much more intentionally carved room. Perhaps the entrance to some sort of old temple? A waterfall is rushing along the back wall, steam wafting off of it. In the center of the room is a stone dais, a 12-foot tall crumbling statue rising over it, face shrouded in a robe of stone, wings extended from its back. Suddenly you hear an echoing, sinister chuckle, and your torches are doused, bathing the cave in darkness. Instinctively, you turn to run, but slam into a stone wall. The tunnel you came in has disappeared. Whatever this place is, you're stuck in it. I love a good cave. All the good stuff happens in caves, in case you couldn't tell. We've reached the point of the spoiler alert. If you are a player and you want to be in this game, take it to your DM. Run along. DMs, you come right this way. Stay together. No pushing. Single file. From here, at this point, I simply say to my players, what do you do? And let them start exploring. There's several things for them to discover. There are old stone sconces on the walls. There are ancient dusty blobs of half-burned candles around the statue, and a couple of old broken metal bird cages. They can't tell exactly where the waterfall is coming from, but it's roaring down into a sizable hole in the cave floor. There doesn't appear to be any other exit from the space. If your players light one of the wall sconces or put one of their torches into it, or light one of the candles that's around the statue, well, the group's going to get to have a little visit from a god. If they get stuck here or seem to be in danger of just immediately jumping through the hole in the floor, what I do is I have a crow appear from the shadows, cawing loudly. This is fun to do with an actual sound bite to get a jump scare out of people. It's going to land next to the candles or on one of the sconces and pick at it. There's a sharp intelligence in its eyes, I tell the players. It seems like it's trying to communicate something to you. Once the candle or whatever it is lit, the space transforms. No longer dusty and crumbling, you see this temple entrance as it once was. Shiny, new, and with a certain feral grandeur to it. And standing on the dais, wings outstretched, is an incredibly handsome man. or woman, whatever you like. This is Rahverok, God King of the Crows. Little side note here, if you're familiar with Norse mythology, Rahverok sounds an awful lot like Ragnarok, the end of the world, the clashing of immortals that's part of that mythology. It's meant to kind of hint at that. It's a very obscure Easter egg I throw in for my players in the longer campaign, to give them the hint that, well, Rahverok, he's trouble, and he's definitely interested in getting into conflict with some of the other gods. What Rahverok says to your players is going to be determined by the motivations you choose as a DM to give him. You've got a lot of options. Maybe it's just for his amusement. He wants to run these players through the dungeon just for shits and giggles. He's kind of an asshole. Maybe he's trapped here and only them completing the dungeon and making a pact with him can free him. That's what I use in my longer campaign. Maybe he's looking for a champion and is absolutely unbothered if there's a good deal of bloodshed in the process of finding one. Perhaps he's looking to interject himself into whatever plot your players were embroiled in before they arrived in his temple. I put a great deal of effort into making Rahverok as devastatingly charming a bad boy as there ever was. I channel Tom Hiddleston's Loki, Neil Newbon's Astarion, Ian Somerhalder's Damon Salvatore. It should be very clear to your players that this gentleman is up to no good. Being taken in by him is a clear mistake, but there's something irresistibly tempting about doing it anyway. After he's given your players whatever spiel you decide about the trials ahead of them and what he wants and desires, some of those desires being obvious, some clearly left unspoken, I always have him say this before he disappears. Oh yes, and one more thing. Watch out for the bear trap. He gives a slightly unhinged laugh, and suddenly he's gone. The temple entrance is back to being an ancient ruin, and the players have a dungeon to delve, and a bear trap to be very curious about. It's time for them to dungeon those dragons, or Durban the dungeon. Anyway, adventure is afoot. Your players may have some strong feelings about being trapped and manipulated by a trickster god. I've really only seen this when I've done it in the context of a larger, longer adventure. I try really hard not to railroad my players as a general rule, so they're not used to me taking away their options. I had a party sit and spend a whole in-game week in this temple entrance, napping, doing arts and crafts in protest before they went ahead and went down the waterfall. Your party may well spend some time trying to claw, chisel, magic, or otherwise blast their way out of this cave. But they're at the whim of a god, and sometimes, every once in a while, a good DM who uses their powers very rarely and thoughtfully earns the right to say, I'm sorry, you're going this way today. You probably won't get such a strong reaction in a one-shot. Players tend to understand the necessity for more boundaries when you've got one sitting to wrap up an adventure. Once your players accept their fate, they need to find a way down that waterfall. It's a 50-foot drop into darkness, and if they choose a way to descend that involves risk, they'll have to make a roll about whether or not they've got some fall damage coming their way. That wraps up room 1 of the dungeon, the temple entrance, and now at the bottom of the waterfall, they find themselves in room 2, the treasure room. The waterfall crashes down into a pool that's about 7 feet deep. Once they crawl out of that, they're in a larger and more roughly hewn cave than the one they just left. This cave is full of stuff. Crammed in every corner, there are piles of items that were left as offerings to Rahverok in better, much more highly worshipful days. You can simply offer that bit of information to your players or have them do an investigation or religion roll about it. You can populate this stuff with whatever objects you'd like. I include a mix of mundane and magical items. A lot of the items have moldered away into nothing. There are heaps of broken bird cages, little crow statuettes, gems, jewelry, ornate daggers with scraps of rotted sheath clinging to them. a brooch made out of a small feather encased in amber, musical instruments with ravens carved into them. There are 4 things present in this room that make up all of its drama. First, there are bones scattered around here and there, different kinds and sizes, some animal, some monster, many humanoid. There are magic items. Be thoughtful about these. In a long campaign, you can make these magic items almost anything. But if it's a one-shot, you should probably try to make sure there's something the players have a chance to use in this dungeon. Otherwise, what was the point of them even being there? There is a very clear door leading out of this room. It has an elaborate lock on it, and sitting next to it on the floor is a jewelry-sized box carved in the same elaborate style. Very matchy-matchy, the box and the lock. Your party can root around the magical items and take non-magical items and take as many as they'd like. But the moment they touch a magic item, it's going to awaken the guardian of this room. Your gal, Owlbear Rogue, spent many years in real life working with wild animals, and animal intelligence is a big theme of this dungeon. It makes sense, right? This dungeon belongs to a crow god, and crows are pretty darn smart. The guardian of this room is a homebrew monster I adore that was inspired by another clever critter, cephalopods, which are octopus, squid, etc. I love that cephalopods often use objects. I particularly love when they use them for cover or defense. If you've never seen an octopus walking along carrying 2 halves of a coconut shell and then plopping them down and sliding inside to hide, you haven't lived. Finish watching this video, then go spend the rest of your day down that YouTube rabbit hole. In the pool that the waterfall is landing in lives a giant cephalopod that wants very much for all of the magic items to stay in this room. It has suckers on the tops and bottoms of its many appendages, and as soon as the party starts messing with something magical, have them make some rolls about whether they notice that the bones littering this place are starting to skitter across the floor. If they notice they're moving towards the pool. If they roll very well, they might notice a strange, sucker-covered, almost transparent arm that's doing the pulling. I give the players a round to react and then have them roll for initiative as this creature comes bursting out of the water covered in bones, suctioning them onto the outside of its body and using them as armor and weapons. You can decide how hard a fight you want this to be. We've discussed before, I tend to skew really tough in one-shots. This could be a giant octopus stat block modified to account for the higher armor class and bludgeoning damage the bone armor provides. It could be a juvenile kraken stat block. Up to you. I like to up the ante here sometimes too by having the room start to flood when the creature makes itself known, the water rising several feet each round. At some point in this fight, if they haven't already, your players are probably going to go for either that box that looks like it might have a key in it or the door that clearly leads out of this space. They're going to discover that the key box is actually an adorable bouncing baby mimic. It's going to stick to their hand and try to eat it. And the door itself? Why, it's a big mama mimic that's going to make a swift exit from this space a bit challenging. I'm going to just pause here to say, I love mimics. I love them so much. I constantly, and with not nearly enough credit, fight the urge to make everything my players touch a mimic. It is one of the greatest accomplishments of my life that the people who play with me regularly are not particularly paranoid about mimics. It is through sheer force of will that I've shown the restraint to keep it that way. Because if they start to suspect that everything is a mimic, then I can't get them with my precious, precious mimics, and that simply won't do. So I bide my time. I wait. I have an idea for a mimic that I've been sitting on for 2 years that I haven't told a soul about because it hasn't been the right time to drop it into a game yet. But one of my groups is in the right place. It's going to happen soon. Comment if you want me to do a video on my favorite ways I use mimics. Anyhow, if your players manage to fight a tiny kraken covered in bone armor and 2 mimics, all without drowning, then they can escape out into a passageway and move on towards room number 3. As they approach room 3 through a narrow tunnel, they'll see that the entrance has a gentle waterfall flowing across it. They will have to pass through the water to move forward. They don't know this yet, but being touched by that water robs them of their magic for the whole time they're in room 3. Your players are probably going to be suspicious of having to walk through a curtain of water. If they try to investigate it with magical means, you can describe this sense of their magic just being sucked towards it and washed away. If you've given them Quibble as a little crow guide through the dungeon, give them a chance to notice that when he flies through the waterfall, the water subtly parts, allowing him to fly through untouched. In my world, side note, Quibble is a real crow, but even more intelligent than a normal one, because he's had many, many centuries to build that intelligence. He serves Rahverok, and every time he dies, Rahverok simply resurrects him. At this point, your players will probably start looking for ways to not touch the water as they pass through the doorway. Sit back, cross your feet, get some popcorn, enjoy their creativity here. Some or all of your magic users may wind up being affected. This will freak them out. Enjoy that part too. But it's really not actually a big deal. They don't need to know that, of course, but it's not. There's nothing dangerous in this room. Room 3 contains a puzzle. And magic negating water is simply meant to signal to a clever player that magic isn't needed to solve that puzzle. Whether they're soggy or dry, they'll enter a circular room. On the far side of the room is a door with an obsidian lock on it. Covering the floor are thousands of small, smooth obsidian stones. In the center of the room is a deep well. Floating on the surface of the water, down in that well, about 15 feet down, is an obsidian key. Remember how I said this dungeon is an homage to animal intelligence? Well, this puzzle is based off a puzzle that crows are famously able to solve. If you give a crow a container with food floating in it that they can't reach and some small stones, they can sometimes figure out to drop the stones into the container, displacing the water, causing the water level to rise until they can reach their snack. That's what your players need to do. They are magically blocked from putting themselves or summoned creatures or any objects into the well to try to get that key. But if they drop an obsidian stone from the floor into the well, the key will shimmer and the water level will rise significantly. They can keep dropping them in until the well is about to overflow, and at that point they can reach in and get the key. Of course, you never want to have only one way for your players to accomplish something. They could cast knock on the door, I suppose, if you want to allow that, and if they still have their magic. Or they could try to dispel magic on the barrier, keeping them from reaching into the well. You have a lot of control here as a DM about whether that kind of thing works. You could have it work, but have the voice of Rahverok tell them they're no fun, and he's going to have his amusement one way or another, and be ominous about it. Again, he's a god. He could just block them from doing those things if that's what you want. If I've got players that I know are down for very spicy one-shot experiences, I've actually run this where any attempts to force or pick open magic open one of these locks automatically brings a player down to 1 hit point. And I've had some players do wonderfully clever things in this room. One time a player stone-shaped the obsidian rocks into something they could reach down into the well with. You can always give them Quibble to give them some clues. They could accidentally kick a rock into the well and find out that it works. At the end of the day, crows can figure this puzzle out. So hopefully it won't be too hard for your players. Hopefully. We hope. Here's hoping. Once they've gotten the key, they can move into room 4. The good news is anyone who lost their magic is going to get it back if you want. If you prefer to be a real meanie, you can make it last as long as you like. The bad news is room 4 is going to be unsettling from the get-go. As soon as all your players enter the room, the door they just came through is going to disappear, trapping them inside. On the opposite wall, there is another door with another elaborate keyhole, and in the middle of this otherwise empty room is a large, rusty old bear trap. Your players will remember that Rahverok warned them to watch out for the bear trap and will probably be cursing his arrogant, mysterious, feathery ass a little bit. Long story short, your players are eventually going to realize they have to set off the bear trap. And if they haven't thrown something into the trap from a distance or used Mage Hand to set it off, if they actually, brazenly, boldly, foolishly decided to be close to this literal trap when they set it off, they're going to need to make a dexterity saving throw because an enormous, undead zombie polar bear is going to fall from the ceiling above them and land on their dumb head. Because it's a bear trap. Get it? A bear trap? Well, Rahverok and I think this is hilarious. Everyone is going to notice this undead bear is mad, very upset. Some particularly perceptive PCs might notice there is a key dangling from some rotting tendons inside its ribcage. They need to get that key, either by re-killing the zombie bear or getting the key out from inside it while it's still trying to kill them and successfully fleeing through the door into room 5. Room 5 is the penultimate room of this adventure, and it's another homage to crows and their incredible puzzle-solving ability. The most complicated puzzle a crow has ever completed in real life involves 8 steps. The way I set this puzzle up for my players is a little complicated to describe verbally. Your gal Owlbear believes in the power of theater of the mind, but strongly suggests physical maps of some sort for at least this part of the dungeon. So what I'm going to do to explain it to you is send you to watch a YouTube video called Crow Solves an 8-Step Puzzle to Get Food. Incredible. I'm also going to put that link down in the description to this video. Watch that. It's only about 3 minutes long. It will help you understand what I'm going for here. The very short explanation is the characters must first obtain a small staff hanging from the ceiling. They need that staff in order to push 3 stones out of 3 cages that the stones are trapped in. I have the stones be little crow statues for funsies. Then they must drop those 3 stones down onto a seesaw that's sunk into the ground in order to get a longer cane that they can use to reach down a narrow little tunnel to get the key that will let them out of this room. I make sure they're magically prevented from getting these objects any other way than solving the puzzle. If they get really stuck, which honestly has never happened to me in probably over a dozen times I've run this, you can always have Quibble give them some clues. I know that's a lot to visualize, I know, but just go watch the crow video. It's amazing in its own right. It's, as I said, only 3 minutes long, and it'll all make a lot more sense. When your players complete this puzzle, you get to give them the good news that they're at least as smart as a crow. Yay! Riding that high, they're now free to move on to the final room of this dungeon. They emerge into a giant arena-like space with enormous stone crow statues looking down on them. Above them, the cave opens up out into the outside world, kind of like the top of a cenote. I love the imagery of snow falling above and melting and disappearing as it reaches the warm air rising out of the cave. At the far end of this arena, lounging rakishly on an elaborate throne shaped like a crow in flight, is Rahverok. Now you have some choices as a DM. What happens next will have a lot to do with whatever motivations you gave him in the beginning. Perhaps he's impressed with them and offers the players a chance to worship him and gain some of his powers. This is what I do when I drop this dungeon into my longer campaign. He exceedingly charmingly offers the players the chance to worship him, assures them that he's not a jealous god and that he has much knowledge and power that he can give. He simply wants a chance to get out of this cave, start building a following again. If one of the players takes him up on this, I award them with an extra level in Trickster Cleric for taking such a chance. From then on, he's going to pop them up out of the cave and back into their regular adventure. And I allow any of the players that took him up on it, to roll a d20 anytime they want to chat with him. If they roll their cleric level or below, then Rahverok will show up offer some help, maybe have a little chat. It's basically like a divine intervention, but I let them do it with a D20 instead of a D100 because Rahverok is not a very good god. He can't do very much. In my world, they're kind of powered by their followers, and as of right now, he only has the one. When he's not hanging out with them, he bamfs off to an area where there's more people to start seducing more followers. The more followers, the more powerful he becomes, the more he has to give to your players as they level up. Of course, he will eventually betray them all and really fuck some shit up. It wouldn't be fun any other way. My favorite way this encounter has ever panned out was Rahverok had honed in on one of the PCs particularly prone to being seduced by his charms. He was focusing all his wiles on her. The PCs were psychically messaging each other about the situation, talking to each other in their heads, thinking he couldn't hear them. But he's a god. Finally, the PC in question asked their best friend in the party for permission to take Rahverok up on his offer. I had Rahverok block the transmission of that message and answer her inside her head in her friend's voice, saying she trusted her to make the decision herself and she should follow her heart. If she thinks that joining up with Rahverok is the right thing, then go for it. The PCs had no idea this was happening, but the players sure did. And they went wild at the drama, the audacity. It was incredible and added so much role play into future relationship building between those characters. Anyhow, whatever motivation you've given Rahverok, you get to decide if this ends with diplomacy or if maybe your PCs aren't feeling diplomatic and you've decided you've got enough time and player energy left to have a little more action. If that's the case, you may want to bust out the gargoyle stat block and have the large stone crows attack your players. At this point, it's all about what makes sense at your table and what pleases a certain feathery trickster god I hope you'll all come to love as much as I do. Take your players to Felvrold to meet Rahverok, or take Rahverok out of Felvrold and put him in your pantheon. Use his dungeon to introduce your players to Felvrold, or drop this dungeon into your world. Take this dungeon and give it a new god, monster, evil necromancer. Just play with it. Let me know if you run this and how it goes. And as always, thank you so much for exploring the feminine urge to play Dungeons and Dragons with me, Owlbear Rogue.